Awesome. Hi, thank you so much, Professor McCaughey, for joining me for the first ever faculty highlight. Really excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So let's jump right in. I want to talk about the course that you're teaching right now. I tried to live, but I got distracted. Do you want to talk a little bit about the course and kind of what got you interested in teaching that with students, and maybe even what you hope students are going to take away from participating?
Sure. Yeah. So this is a first year writing and research course. So it's UW 1020, which every student takes, they choose a theme. And the theme really arose from a book that's sort of the central text of the class. So the book is called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It's a few years old now, but students, it's from 2020. But if we're talking about the attention economy, that's already like a little bit dated. So we supplement it with some more current readings. But the book is really about sort of the larger systems at play, some of which are tech companies, but some of which are maybe a little less expected, that keep us from doing deep work and make it harder and harder for us to focus for extended periods of time on complicated, important things. So I really felt like this was a great first year writing course theme because students are moving into college where they're expected to have extremely tight long-term focus on deep work, but also spread themselves out across many classes, as you know, as a student. And and this is sort of in the midst of all of us struggling so much with our attention being pulled everywhere, whether that's due to social media or just sort of the nature of our work in our world right now. So I recommend the book. It's great. Typically, my students really, really love it and have a lot to say about it. I was skeptical. I didn't want to read it at first, but my husband had read it, and I was like, "Oh, I've read a million think pieces on this. I don't need another book." But he was like, really convinced me this is different, and he was right. I really love it, and I think it gives students a really nice sort of jumping off point to think about their own lives, but also sort of the larger world around them.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So, in your publications and kind of the research that you're doing, do you take that focus about, the attention economy, social media writing? Is anything like that kind of influencing the research you're doing right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. To some extent, yes. So I teach that course, and then I also in the fall teach a UW 1020 that's a little more professional writing focused. It's focused on international nonprofits, and we partner with an organization called Clinic+O, which is actually founded by one of my former students. And I also teach an upper level WID course in comm and organizational sciences about professional writing. So those are a little bit more closely tied to my research. My research is typically about writing transfer in professional spaces. So writing transfer is really sort of, if I had to distill it down, I would say it's about the way we accumulate writing skills and knowledge and then move them into new different spaces. So how do we sort of translate these skills and this knowledge about writing into contexts that are really different? And what we know from the scholarship is not very well. Students really struggle, even really strong academic writers often have a really significant sort of disorientation when they're asked to write in the workplace. And so a lot of my research is around that and talking with professionals about the ways in which they transferred or didn't those writing skills from college.
That's amazing. And it's so cool that you get to work with, older students who now have kind of gotten into the real world and are using maybe those skills that they've learned in your classes, and applied it to the professional workspace. That's amazing.
It's very fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really fun to see some of my students who've sort of, yeah, made their way out into the working world and to get to talk with them and have them reflect not just about my class, but about, all of the coursework that they did and all the writing that they did and what they see as really valuable from those experiences and what they really don't, right? That's really gives me a lot of insight as a teacher.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, yeah, thank you so much. And kind of moving a little bit away from maybe the professional space and kind of helping the GW community to get to know you a little bit better on maybe a personal level. Do you want to talk about maybe what you do outside of work? Do you have any fun hobbies? Is there anything that you like to do um, outside of that?
Sure. I'm at a bit of a boring stage in my life. I have a small child, and so most of my hobbies revolve around playgrounds and libraries. and like walking around the woods and collecting rocks, which there's some real joy to. I feel like prior to having a kid, I would have said like, oh, I love to travel. I love to like try new restaurants in DC. I love museums. And there's a lot less of that in this exact moment. But sort of hobbies outside of wandering around the woods with a child. I'm a big reader. I'm a big audiobook lover specifically. So, yeah, my sort of downtime, if I have alone time, is often taking a really long walk by myself, listening to a really good audiobook. I listen to sort of a mix of everything from like classic literary stuff to like really trashy celebrity memoirs. I have no yeah, I sort of am open to everything. I like to cook. I feel like I've had less time in the past few years for it, but that's something else. Occasionally I'll sort of get in the zone and go through a good cooking period as a hobby, try some new recipes, usually with my headphones in and I'm still listening to a book. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Do you have like a go-to recipe?
Yes, it's pretty boring, but I make an amazing vegetarian chili.
Mm.
Um, and I make it frequently because it's like the one thing in my home that everyone will eat, including my child, who's very picky. So, yeah.
That's awesome. And I think it's so interesting how people who like to read kind of do it in different mediums. Like I feel like an audiobook is so difficult. Like I need to see something on the page in front of me. Do you have a audiobook that you're listening to right now or like a favorite that you go back to?
It's a great question. Well, I will say I resisted audiobooks for decades. I thought, oh, it's like not my way. I really love to sit with a book. And I think during COVID, I really wasn't reading.
Mhm.
Like many people, like I was just like in survival mode. And I was finding I really, really missed it. But whenever I sat down with an actual book, I just immediately fell asleep or got pulled in a different direction. So that it was about 4 years ago during COVID when I started saying like, okay, I think this is the only way I can like consume books right now. And I've really fallen in love with the medium. Audiobooks from when I was like your age, they were pretty blah. Like they weren't actors who read, they weren't like really great audio narrators. And now it's like a whole world, like really, really great readers. And so I think that changes it quite a bit. Um, the best audiobook I have listened to recently is probably um The Bee Sting. It's a hulking book. I mean, it's like a rough recommendation because it's like a 800-page novel. It's an Irish novel. I really loved it. There's multiple narrators. So it's like four or five different actors who sort of embody these various characters. And I just thought it was phenomenal. I thought it was a great, especially in audio form. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I'll have to check it out. Speaking of like the Irish and Ireland, this is kind of going back to your professional space. I know you were recently on a CCAS panel with faculty from Queen's University in Belfast, kind of talking about like bridging the divide and kind of reconciling with polarization right now. Do you want to talk a little bit kind of about that and kind of what you shared on the panel?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this panel was really fun to do. It's part of a larger university seminar that GW sponsored on sort of the high level topic of divided communities. And so it's a partnership between a handful of us in the CCAS with folks from Queen's University, as you mentioned, in Belfast. And that's a partnership that had kind of existed prior to this university seminar because we run a small but I think pretty awesome program called the Global Bachelor's Program. So GW partners with Queens. This Global Bachelor's Program at GW allows students to spend 3 semesters or 2 semesters on a summer abroad during their GW career. And they have a lot of options. Sort of the world is their oyster for the second two, but for the first one, they go in a cohort either to Queen's University in Belfast or to a university in Singapore. And so I had the opportunity last year to go to Queen's. I teach in the Global Bachelor's Program, just one course a semester. Um, And so I got the chance to go there and sort of get a better sense of what our students are experiencing while they're there. And a handful of other faculty in the school did this as well. And we realized like there's just so much we can learn from one another. And we have this sort of built-in partnership. So we decided to really try to expand that. And this has been an ongoing seminar over the course of the academic year that it looks like will stretch into next year. So yeah, a few weeks ago, we had two folks from Belfast come. Jamie Powell, who's I believe he's like a political historian. I think that's what his title would be. And Ali Fitzgibbon, who's also from Queens, and she runs their international programs, but she also has a really interesting background in sort of like cultural arts management. And so throughout the course of the day, a handful of GW folks talked about their research as it related to divided communities, and so did Ali and Jamie. And then there was time for discussion after each of those talks, where we sort of saw like what are the intersections of these sort of research paths and where do we and teaching paths too. Some folks were talking about their teaching, and then sort of what can we learn from one another. And I was talking about a very new research project. So I mentioned this course that I teach. Where we partner with an international healthcare nonprofit called Clinic+O. And over the past two falls, I've done this. It's a community engaged course through the Nashman Center at GW. And most of the work has really been pedagogically focused. Like it's very much about teaching students real world skills while also serving this sort of under-resourced but really amazing organization. But as I've worked with the founder, who I mentioned is a former student of mine, I've gotten more and more interested in sort of the internal communication that happens within an organization like this. So he is a former student of mine, but he's originally from Guinea in West Africa. That's where the organization is based. And they're serving rural communities who wouldn't otherwise have access to healthcare in Guinea and in other parts of West Africa. They're just starting to expand. So they have they have a very small group of people in New York who do things like fundraising and sort of high level operations. And then they have a professional staff in Conakry, the capital of Guinea. And then they have community health workers who are the folks out in these communities who work for Clinic+O, but actually do the sort of work on the ground with these communities to bring them healthcare through, tech-enabled solutions. And the more I talk to Nasser Jallo, who's the founder, who I co-teach this course with, the more I got really, really interested into sort of like the intercultural, but also other sort of barriers within this organization. So, what are sort of the cultural issues of these folks in these rural communities who are from these rural communities? How does a workplace operate when you have three different groups of folks all over with really different backgrounds and honestly really different sort of personal goals? And then we also have these international funders. So we have a lot going on in this organization. And since my area is professional communication, this got really interesting to me. And so that was the project I talked about, starting to interview some of the folks in the organization and try to make a little bit of sense of like what does a really under-resourced international organization in this area of Africa, what does communication look like there? And what are the communication problems that people really haven't thought to start solving yet? So that was the project I talked about during the Divided Community Seminar.
Yeah, that is amazing. Wow, that's incredible. That's so
Thank you.
cool. And I know that, you're not only teaching professional communication to students, but you're also working with colleagues and peers. I know that you host a writing retreat with Professor Myers, and kind of giving faculty the opportunity to kind of work and collaborate in a setting where they can bounce ideas off of one another. And it's proven to be really successful. I know the last writing retreat we had, there was a lot of attendance and people really took advantage of the resources that were being provided. Do you want to maybe talk about kind of the writing retreat and kind of what got you into that and kind of how it's worked with faculty?
For sure. Yes, the GW faculty retreat is a kind of a passion project for me and for Professor Myers. We have been running this retreat. We developed it, I guess, maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And we're at the point now where it runs 3 times a year. January late May or early June, and then late August, right before classes begin. And it's open to faculty all across the university who really want a space, as you said, to sort of come and spend time writing, but also get feedback and sort of write in community. So it's a 3-day retreat. We hold it over at our campus on the Mount Vernon campus in Post Hall, which is a big, beautiful old space you're probably familiar with. And folks come early morning to late afternoon. And mostly it's really structured writing time. So we will give some, some goal setting prompts, a little bit of reflection. We'll talk about writing strategies and publishing strategies, but mostly the time is there for them to sort of block everything else out and write. It's sponsored by the Vice Provost for Research office, which right now is headed by interim Vice Provost Robert Miller. And we feed them really well. That's one thing that we like take quite a bit of pride in. All of the evaluations, we joke like they like the food the best, but we feed them so they don't have to worry about that. We sort of take care of all their like bodily needs so that they can really sit and concentrate on writing and publishing, which is always it's really, really important to them, to their departments, and to the university. But it often gets that time gets taken up by other things, mostly by teaching, because most of us are very dedicated to our students. And it can be hard to find that sort of those large chunks of time to really dig into a research project. And during those retreats, we also have optional sort of sessions where folks can brainstorm with one another and get feedback from one another. And then Professor Myers and I do individual consulting for these folks as well. So they can sign up to sit down with me or with Professor Myers and really yeah, get some feedback on what they're doing or talk out a writing problem or try to figure out a publishing or editing issue. And it's really a joy. I think we started it not knowing would people want to do this? Do people want to trek over to our campus? And sit with a bunch of people they don't know, because that is very much how it works. Like we have folks from every school and nearly every department and program. It's really, really exciting in that way. I personally have met more people in the university doing these retreats than I have in 13 years at GW in a different capacity. And yeah, people were really, really excited about it. And so it's really joyful for us. And it's a chance, I think, to really build community among faculty when we're often quite siloed. Writing is such a solitary thing. We're often in our offices, really sort of hunkered down if we're doing that work. And so to write along with colleagues and to have the chance, say over lunch, to say to someone in a totally different department, hey, what are you working on? And the people we're working with are doing such cool things that we would never know about otherwise. So yeah, it's a really, really fun part of my job right now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love how, you're making writing this community effort and kind of redefining it. I think that's awesome. And I can attest that the food was great. Like I still think about that mango sticky
And,
rice. It was
and,
amazing.
and you're an excellent, you're our sort of retreat assistant, which is like heavenly. So yes.
I had a great time. Well, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate hearing about your work, your hobbies, and kind of what you're doing with the GW community. And I really hope that this faculty highlight kind of serves as an opportunity for the GW community to get to know you just a little bit better. So thank you so much again for joining. I really appreciate having you on here.
Thank you, Sia. This was so fun to chat with you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.